Hi everyone, I'm 𝗪𝗘𝗕𝗦𝗧𝗪. Let's look at how Solomon built a temple for Yahuah. King Solomon sent for a servant. It's time to begin building Yahuah's house, he announced. I've given a lot of thought to this project, and now it's time to start. All the Israel knew about this wonderful plan. King David, Solomon's father, had wanted to build a special house for Yahuah, but Yahuah told him, no, David's son, the next king, would build the temple. Now King David was dead, and Solomon had been the king of Israel for 4 years. And he was finally ready to begin building the temple. I want to send a letter to Hiram, the king of Tyre. Solomon said he paced up and down the room. Finally, he said he began to say what he wanted to write to Hiram. You are a good friend of my father David. Solomon began. He was not able to build a temple to honor Yahuah as he wanted to. Now I'm going to do it. Please cut all cedar trees from your mountain for me. I will send the men to help servants with the work, and I will pay it whatever you ask. King Hiram was pleased to receive Solomon's letter. He sent word that he would indeed provide lumber for the temple, and he promised to send 𝗪𝗾𝗪𝗞, a great artist, to help Solomon's workers. 𝗪𝗾𝗪𝗞 knew how to work with gold and silver and bronze and wood. He also knew all about stonework and carpentry. He also could teach about weaving and dyeing beautiful fabrics. It took thousands of people to work on the huge temple project. King Solomon sent 300 men to King Hiram to help cut down the trees and bring them home. 800 other men cut beautiful stone out of the mountainside and shaped them into blocks. When taken to the temple, the blocks fit together like pieces in a puzzle. There was no sound of hammers or axes or any iron tools at the building site. This was one way the workers showed reverence and respect for Yahuah. Solomon's temple was the most beautiful, expensive building ever built on earth at the time. On the inside, the stone walls were completely covered with wood. The wood was decorated with carvings of angels, palm trees, and flowers, and then it was completely covered with gold. Even the floor and the ceiling were covered in gold. Artists carved 2 great angels from olive wood. They overlaid the angels with gold too. The angels were placed in the most set-apart place, where the ark of Yahuah would rest. Their lovely wings stretched across the entire room. All the furniture in the temple was beautiful and carefully made as possible. Yeshua wanted to honor Yahuah in the very best way. Who can really build Yahuah a worthy home? Solomon asked. Not even the highest heaven can contain him. Our bodies are now this temple, guys, and we're going to discover that everything Solomon went through to follow Yahuah's pattern for his temple, we must go through to prepare this special place for Yahusha to come and live in our bodies. Our bodies are where he wants to dwell in now, but we need to behave the right way if we want to experience him like this. So are you ready to dive deeper into Solomon's temple? Well, here we go. Thank you, everybody.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Behavior Revolution, and we've come to that point in Kings where we're going to be dealing with Solomon's temple. So we thought we'll do a big series all about Solomon's temple and the building and what it means, the structure, all of the compounds used in it, and then when we get to Kings we will have covered it very intensively. So before we get into today's lesson, Mikey's here. He's going to take us through the first scriptures, the foundational scriptures of Solomon's temple. Thanks, Mikey.
Hey brothers and sisters, this is really exciting. I can't wait to go through Solomon's temple with you. And this is the text where it comes from in the scripture. 1 Kings 6-7. 480 years after Yisrael came out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign as king, in the 2nd month, Solomon started building the temple of Yahuah, which was 90 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 45 feet high. There was a porch across the 30-foot width of the temple that extended out 15 feet. Within the temple, he made narrow, deep-silled windows, and against the outside walls, he built a supporting structure in which there were smaller rooms. The lower floor was nearly 8 feet wide, the middle floor 9 feet, and the third floor nearly 11 feet. He had projecting ledges built into the outside temple walls to support the adjoining beams. The stone blocks for the building of the temple were all dressed at the quarry so that the building site itself was extremely quiet. No noise from hammers and chisels and other iron tools. The entrance to the ground floor was at the south end of the temple, and the stairs led to the 2nd floor, and then to the 3rd. Solomon built and completed the temple, finishing it off with the roof beams and planks of cedar. The supporting structure along the outside walls was attached to the temple with cedar beams, and the rooms in it were nearly 8 feet tall. The word of Yahuah came to Solomon, saying, "About this temple you are building, what's important is that you live the way I've set out for you, and do what I tell you, following my instructions carefully and obediently. Then I'll complete in you the promise I made to David your father. I'll personally take up my residence among the Israelites, and I won't desert my people Israel." So Solomon built and completed the temple, paneling the interior walls from floor to ceiling with cedar planks, and for flooring he used cypress. The 30 feet at the rear of the temple he made into an inner sanctuary, cedar planks from the floor to ceiling, the most set-apart place. The main sanctuary in front was 60 feet long. The entire interior of the temple was cedar, with carvings of fruits and flowers, all cedar so that none of the stone was exposed. The inner sanctuary within the temple was for housing the Ark of the Blood Covenant of Yahuah. This inner sanctuary was a cube, 30 feet each way, all plated with gold. The altar of cedar was also gold-plated. Everywhere you looked, there was pure gold. Gold chains strung in front of the gold-plated inner sanctuary. Gold everywhere, walls, ceiling, floor, and altar, dazzling and sparkling. Then Solomon made 2 cherubim, gigantic angel-like figures, from olive wood. Each was 15 feet tall. The outstretched wings of the cherubim, they were identical in size and shape, measured another 15 feet. He placed the cherubim, their wings spread, in the inner sanctuary. The combined wing spread stretched the width of the room. The wing of one cherubim touched one wall, the wing of the other wall, and the wings touched in the middle. The cherubim were gold-plated. Solomon then carved engravings of cherubim, palm trees, and flower blossoms on all the walls of both the inner and the main sanctuary, and all the floors of both inner and outer rooms were gold-plated. He constructed doors of olive wood for the entrance to the inner sanctuary. The lintel and doorposts were 5-sided. The doors were also carved with cherubim, palm trees, and flowers, and then covered with gold leaf. Similarly, he built the entrance to the main sanctuary using olive wood for the doorposts, but these doorposts were 4-sided. The doors were of cypress, split into 2 panels, each panel swinging separately. These also were carved with cherubim, palm trees, and flowers, and planted with finely hammered gold leaf. Solomon built the inner court with 3 courses of dressed stones, topped with a course of plain cedar timbers. The foundation for Yahuah's temple was laid in the 2nd month of the 4th year of Solomon's reign, and it was completed in the 8th month of the 11th year, down to the last detail, just as planned. So it took Solomon 7 years to build the temple. Then it took Solomon another 13 to finish building his own palace complex. He built the palace of the forest of Lebanon, 150 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. There were 4 rows of cedar columns supporting 45 cedar beams, 15 in each row, and then roofed with cedar. Windows in groupings of 3 were set high in the walls on either side. All the doors were rectangular and arranged symmetrically. Solomon built a huge courtyard, 75 feet long and 45 wide. It had a roofed porch at the front with ample eaves. He built a courtroom, the Hall of Justice, where he would decide judicial matters, and paneled it with cedar. He built his personal residence behind the hall on a similar plan. Solomon also built another one, just like it, for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had married. No expense was spared. Everything here, inside and out, from foundation to roof, was constructed using high-quality stone, accurately cut and shaped and polished. The foundation stones were huge, ranging in size from 12 to 15 feet, and of the very best quality. The finest stone was used above the foundation, shaped to size and trimmed with cedar. The courtyard was enclosed with a wall made of 3 layers of stone and topped with cedar timbers, just like the one in the porch of the temple of Yahuah. King Solomon sent to Tyre and asked Hiram to come. Hiram's mother was a widow from the tribe of Naphtali. His father was a Tyrian and a master worker in bronze. Hiram was a real artist. He could do anything with bronze. He came to King Solomon and did all the bronze work. First, he cast 2 pillars in bronze, each 27 feet tall and 18 feet in circumference. He then cast 2 capitals in bronze to set on the pillars. Each capital was nearly 8 feet high and flared at the top in the shape of a lily. Each capital was dressed with an elaborate filigree of 7 braided chains and a double row of 200 pomegranates, setting the pillars off magnificently. He set the pillars up in the entrance porch to the temple. The pillar to the south he named Jachin, and the pillar to the north, Boaz. The capitals were in the shape of lilies. When the pillars were finished, Hiram's next project was to make the sea, an immense round basin of cast metal 15 feet in diameter, nearly 8 feet tall, and 45 feet in circumference. Just under the rim there were 2 bands of decorative gourds, 10 gourds to each 1.5 feet. The gourds were cast in one piece with the sea. The sea was set on 12 bulls, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. The bulls faced outwards, supporting the sea on their hindquarters. The sea was 3 inches thick and flared at the rim like a cup or like a lily. It held about 11,500 gallons. Hiram also made 10 washstands of bronze. Each was 6 feet square and nearly 5 feet tall. These artifacts were never weighed. There were far too many. Nobody has any idea how much bronze was used. Solomon was also responsible for all the furniture and accessories in the temple of Yahuah. The golden altar, the golden table of showbread, the pure gold lampstands, 5 to the right and 5 to the left in front of the inner sanctuary, the gold flowers, lamps, and tongs, the pure gold dishes, wick trimmers, sprinkling bowls, ladles, and censers, the gold sockets for the doors of the inner sanctuary, the most set-apart place, used also for the doors of the main sanctuary. And that completed all the work King Solomon did on the temple of Yahuah. He then brought in the items consecrated by his father David, the silver and the gold and the artifacts. He placed them all in the treasury of Yahuah's temple.
Whew. That was a tongue twister, wasn't it?
Yeah.
How'd you go with all that?
A lot of gold.
A lot of gold, mate. There's stacks of gold.
And bronze.
Oh, wow. We're about to find out a lot more.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Well, that was full on, wasn't it? You can see Solomon had to stick to the pattern precisely. Why? We're going to find out why. For our first lesson, we've got about 6 or 8 lessons laid out about Solomon's temple. We're going to really have a full, fat understanding of why Yahuah wanted this temple to be built. Today we're going to start with a study called Divine Habitations. What's that all about? Firstly, let's look at Divine Habitations. Why study the temple? Why study this temple? Why are we studying the tabernacle of Moses? Why did we study David's tent? Why are we studying the temple of Solomon? The first temple of Yahuah, with its detailed description, its furnishings and measurements, priestly sacrifices, and order of praise, is a wonderfully rich and rewarding study for those who desire to truly understand how Yahusha is the ultimate fulfillment of every prophecy and shadow. Truly, there is no more revelation to receive once at the feet of Yahusha. For he is endless, not only in love, but Yahusha is the finality of all revelation. Yahusha is the finality of all revelation. He's the fulfillment of everything. Amazing. Why go backwards? Why go back and do things that he's already fulfilled? Men through history have endeavored to erect beautiful buildings and structures, magnificent in architectural design, beauty and esteem, in order to make a name for themselves. However, none can compare with the structures which Yahuah, the wise master builder, designed, which he gave by revelation and inspiration to his servants, who built according to the divine pattern shown to them. This is all about divine structures and divine patterns in this lesson today. Pagan kings built temples for themselves or their people and priesthood, but all became idolatrous temples and devil dwellings in due time. But Yahuah's temple became the dwelling of his esteem. Most important thing, became the dwelling of his esteem, his presence, his spirit, and there he communicated with his people. Yes, Yahuah himself dwelt in the structures which he himself commanded to be built, so that he could live among his redeemed. Many believers have a reasonable knowledge and understanding of Moses' tabernacle in the wilderness with its many truths. However, few seem to inquire into the same amazing truths that are found in the Temple of Solomon, only in greater amplification. along with divine additions. Everything that Moses got on the mountain, the blueprints for the tabernacle of Moses, all the truths, all the shadows, everything that was found in that is found in the Temple of Solomon, but in much greater amplification, plus other things as well. So, why study Solomon's temple? Why study Tabernacle of Moses? Why study David's tent? Here's a few reasons why we should study this neglected portion of the set apart scriptures. Because 1, Yahusha came to fulfill all that was shadowed forth and prophesied of in the law and the prophets. Reason 1. The temple and its whole sacrificial system shadowed forth and prophesied of the sufferings of Messiah and the esteem that would follow. These are just like a flowing through an introductory type thing here. We're going to go into all these points in much richer, deeper. Why else should we study it? Because as we study the external form of the temple, we will discover the knowledge and truth hidden within it. The external and the material has passed away, as we know, but the knowledge and the truth hidden within remains. That's what we want, the stuff that's hidden between the pages, the abstract. We know the external and materials passed away, but the knowledge and the truth hidden, that remains. It is unveiled by new blood covenant truth and revelation. Why else should we study the Temple of Solomon? Number 3, because the same is applicable to the Temple of Solomon as what's spoken of concerning the Tabernacle of Moses. The tabernacle was a figure, it was an example, it was a parable, it was a pattern, it was a type of heavenly things in the 𝗕𝗪𝗾. So is the Temple of Solomon. All this was written about the Tabernacle of Moses, same true with the Temple of Solomon. Heavenly, it's a pattern of heavenly things. You want to understand things that are in the higher dimension, you got to understand the blueprints, look at the shadows. Because the old blood covenant period was the age of the shadow, and a shadow of good things to come. As we follow the shadow, we eventually come to the person whose shadow it was, Yahushua Messiah. The purpose of the shadow is to bring us to the substance. The purpose of prophecy is to bring us to the fulfillment. So, the earthly temple, as a shadow, is to bring us to the divine temple, the substance and the reality of all things. The temple, just like the tabernacle of Moses, was a pattern of divine realities of the heavenly temple. Why else should we study this? Because a divine principle is first the natural, then afterwards that which is spiritual. That's in 1 Corinthians. Paul says, first the natural, then afterwards that which is spiritual. We look at the natural, the material, which is temporal, in order to discover by the Spirit that which is spiritual and eternal. The seen brings us to the unseen. The visible helps us to understand the invisible. You want to understand the invisible? You want to understand the realm of the 𝗕𝗪𝗾? You got to look at the points, the shadows, all the visible things that he laid out for us, all the clues. Why else study this temple? 6, because man himself was created to be the temple or dwelling place of Yahuah, a place where heaven and earth are connected through a portal doorway. But sin ruined the temple and severed the connection. So, Yahusha is now restoring mankind through deliverance and divine operation to be his temple, indwelt by the set-apart spirit of Yahusha. The bride today, individually and very soon corporately, in an assembly, a fellowship, that kind of way, the bride today individually and very soon corporately constitutes the temple of Yahuah in the 21st century. Isn't that amazing? So keep that in the forefront of your minds as we go through this study. The end of the story is, of course, Yahusha was the ultimate, the first fruit, the new creature. There's no other being like him, ever has been, until we become that. And then, of course, the assembly, us, is the ultimate fulfillment of everything we're going to learn in this temple. The indwelling is all us, of course. Keep that in the front of your mind. Let's continue. Why else should we study this temple? Because the temple was a symbolic and typical representation, first of Yahusha, and secondly of the assembly. Believers are spoken of as living stones, being built into a spiritual house as the temple of the set apart Spirit. The temple was a prophetic structure. Immaterial truth was hidden in material form. Immaterial truth was hidden in material form to help us understand. The material structure represented spiritual insights. And finally, because, as will be seen, the earthly temple was a shadow of the divine temple. Both the tabernacle of Moses and David's tent were earthly shadows of heavenly things. And the same is true for the temple of Solomon. The true temple is eternal and divine. John, in Revelation, he saw the temple of the tabernacle of witness in heaven opened. The things built on earth were built after the pattern of things in the heavens. Both Moses and David, who received the revelation of the tabernacle and temple in heaven, actually saw the same things, actually saw the same truths. Slightly different design. The numbers were a bit bigger, grander, amplified in Solomon's temple. But basically, the truths that are being shadowed forward here, both Moses and David saw the exact same visions as, of course, what John saw later on through the revelation. So these, we would say, are the major scriptural reasons for a study of the temple built by Solomon. Yahushua himself often spoke in parables, which are just stories, to the multitudes. However, his disciples knew that within and beyond the parable was eternal truth, and only those who had ears to hear and eyes to see would know the truth veiled within the parable. And likewise, the temple has many hidden truths veiled in it, and those truths are brought to light by the set-apart Spirit, who is the Spirit of wisdom. So put your minds, plug into the abstract here, and as we go deeper and deeper into all the building blocks and all the substances used in the temple, you're going to see some pretty amazing truths and shadows revealed. Still talking about the parables. The multitude may never see these truths, for they are abstractly discerned. And it is the esteem, I like this, the multitude may never see these truths, for they are abstractly discerned. And it is the esteem of Yahuah to conceal a matter, but it is the honor of kings to search it out. Yahuah is well within his rights to hide things, keep things hidden, to see who really wants him. But what does the proverb say? It's the esteem of Yahuah to conceal a matter. He can hide whatever he wants. But it is the honor of kings and priests to search it out. That's us. Search, seek, and you will find. The language of creation becomes the language of redemption and deliverance. Creation's language is actually Yahuah's secret code for either concealing or revealing truth, according to the behavior and attitude of the hearer. So you can have 50 people reading the same text and none of them may get it. And you might come along, if you've got the right behavior and attitude, and just get it all revealed to you, because the Spirit reveals it abstractly. Symbolic, abstract language reveals eternal truths. in the scripture to those who are listening to the Spirit of Yahusha. Spiritual ignorance may pass. The study of the tabernacle. Once again, spiritual ignorance may pass the study of the temple as merely a type. But to the hungry in Messiah, the set-apart Spirit will take the word line on line, here a little and there a little, precept upon precept, and reveal the esteem of Yahusha and his bride. Word by word, line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little. These are all terminology in the scriptures, guys. And he reveal it to us. Yahusha himself said, in this place, the temple, is one greater than the temple. In this place is one greater than the temple. And again, he said later on, behold, one greater than Solomon is here. We're going to look into that too. The divine tabernacle was a greater and more perfect tabernacle than the wilderness tabernacle. And so too, the temple in Shamayim is a greater and more perfect temple than the earthly temple that Solomon built. Yahusha is greater than Solomon and all his wisdom and esteem, because Yahusha is the wisdom and esteem of Yahuah personified. All of it bottled up in his person. He is greater than Solomon's temple in all its grandeur, because he himself is the temple, and the wisdom and the esteem of Yahuah manifest in bodily form. Messiah himself is greater than the material building, greater than the articles of furniture, greater than the sacrifices and oblations, greater than the priesthood orders, greater than all, for he himself is the temple in human form. That's why we come in praise now to him as a person, not in worship to a building. The psalmist said, gather my people together unto me. Unto him shall the gathering of the people be, says Jacob. He is the living temple, which is greater than the material temple. The eternal temple is far greater than the temporal temple. Solomon's temple was local, geographical, and especially designed for one people that at that time, chosen nation of Israel. But Yahusha, as Yahuwah's living temple, is the universal dwelling to whom all nations may now come for deliverance, sacrifice, and praise. Let's not forget that as well. Moses' tabernacle was all about sacrificial system. David brought in this revolutionary praise behavior, which then carried on into Solomon's temple, where it was deliverance, sacrifice, and praise all mixed together. So, let's not forget that Solomon's temple was local, and it was only designed for one group of people, Israel, Yahuwah's chosen people at that point in time. But Yahusha, as Yahuwah's living temple, is the universal dwelling to whom all nations may now come for deliverance, sacrifice, and praise. And there's a little bit of a diagram there. You can see where this all began, heaven and earth. Two separate dimensions. They had open heavens, portal. Then sin came and wrecked everything. Yahuwah appeared as a burning bush, a little bit of a portal there, and on other little altars he'd pop up here and there, little portals here and there. Tabernacle was the main one, until of course Solomon's temple came, and then of course Yahusha came. He was the living portal, the living dwelling of Yahuwah. And then of course it came on the day of Pentecost into the bride, into the assembly, the fellowship of believers. And we look for the day when the city, the New Jerusalem, is right there. Just a bit of a beginning and ending the history of the portal there. Another important truth to keep in mind is that even though Yahuwah commanded the temple to be built and then visibly dwelt in it through his esteemed presence, Solomon recognized the truth of just who Yahuwah really is. Because he said, But who is able to build him a house, since heaven and even the heaven of heaven are unable to contain him? Who am I then, that I should build him a house, except to offer before him? Interesting. Solomon knew that, what am I trying to build a house for? This is the cosmic universe. This is the living Elohim. Here, Solomon recognized the attributes of Yahuwah's spirituality, immensity of being, omnipresence, which is everywhere at once, as well as omnipotence, all-powerful, and omniscience, all-knowing. This is all Yahuwah. Solomon recognized this. Yahuwah cannot be limited to temples made with hands, for he inhabits eternity, all time and space. Yahuwah, who is spirit, cannot be confined to the material. Yet, in his mercy and favor, he manifested himself in the material temple for us, so we could understand him. With our daft minds, he came in visual form so we would understand him. In Isaiah it says, "Heaven is my throne, the earth is my footstool. Where is the house that you build for me? And where is the place of my rest? For all those things has my hand made," says Yahuwah. Solomon understood the immensity of the task he was taking on, and more accurately, he understood the immensity of the being that was coming to dwell there. He knew he couldn't contain it. It was just a building. But the tragic thing was, in the time of Yahusha, and also Jeremiah's time, the Jews ended up worshipping the temple of Yahuwah itself. The bricks, the mortar. They ended up worshipping the temple and missed Yahuwah, the Elohim of that temple. It is also noteworthy that Yahuwah did not inspire men to give full and complete details in Scripture of the temple. I mean, there's a lot of details in there, as we saw Micah go through some. There's a lot of detail there, but he didn't give all full details of what was in the temple. Why? Knowing that man is a great duplicator and imitator of divine things. Man always imitates and tries to duplicate divine things, and would simply repeat the fatal mistakes of Israel and worship a building and miss the builder of all things, as they did. However, Yahuwah did give enough details for us to understand the general design and construction of it. It is also interesting that there are more specific references in the New Blood Covenant writings, the New Testament. There are more specific references in the New Blood Covenant writings to the assembly being the temple of Yahuwah rather than the tabernacle of Yahuwah. It doesn't say anywhere, "You are the tabernacle of the living." No, it says, "You are the temple." You are the temple. Although both are true. And perhaps this emphasis is because, as we've recently learned, Moses' tabernacle was primarily revolved around the sacrificial system. Then David's tent focused on music and praise. However, through Solomon's temple, a balanced system of both sacrifice and praise was combined and ran parallel in a unified behavior of national worship. That's why in the New Testament, later on, it's always referred to the temple. We are the living temple. Don't you know you're the temple of the living? The temple, not the tabernacle, not the tent. No, you are the temple. Why? Because in the temple, it was all unified. The sacrifice, the praise, into a unified behavior of national worship. This is all going to make sense. And of course, now Yahusha's bride is the habitation of Yahusha in the earth, being trained to daily offer herself as a living sacrifice, surrendering the bulls of her lips and behavior to him as a sweet fragrance of praise. So, Solomon's temple was a type, a shadow, and prophetic figure and structure of 1, Yahushua Messiah, 2, the bride, his body made up of many members, 3, the heavenly temple and eternal realities, 4, the city of Yahuwah, the New Jerusalem, the eternal habitation of Yahusha and his redeemed. It abounds with spiritual truths and precious gems. All of the esteem of Solomon's temple was but a faint revelation of all the esteem revealed in the true temple, Yahusha and his bride. Keep that there. That's where we're going to end up with all these studies. All of the esteem, and we're going to see some there's been no building built with the expense that this was. All of the esteem of Solomon's temple was but a faint revelation of the esteem revealed in the true temple, Yahusha and his bride. All this was to be revealed in a man and then a company of people. So, that's the divine habitation. Let's look a little bit at the pattern that was given to David. Just briefly, let's briefly look at the events that led to King David getting the revelation of the temple pattern. Remember, we're going back to the end of David's life here and the beginning of Solomon's reign. So we're overlapping a bit here. I thought we'll go through this study, full-on study of Solomon's temple, because King David's about to die. King Solomon is about to take over. And one of the first things he does, takes him a while, is build the temple. So I wanted to, unlike what I did with David and missed half of it and had to go back, I want to cover all this information. So we've got it here. For those of us who are learning, going through the scriptures possibly for the first time together, learning it, this is where we're going to go. Let's briefly look at the events that led to King David getting the revelation of the temple pattern, the blueprints. In 2 Samuel 6 and 1 Chronicles 15, we have the record of David placing the Ark of Yahuah in a tent and establishing the order of singers and musicians not previously known in Israel's history, particularly relating to the worship of Yahuah. This order of worship and praise was established about 30 years or more before the building of Solomon's temple. David had it all together, practicing, singing, dancing, everything, praising, psalms, 30 odd years before the temple. This praise behavior was also incorporated into the temple order in due time, and the Ark of Yahuah was taken out of this tent and set in the temple. And its final home, final resting place. The arrest from all enemies. David was a man of war, and Yahuah used him to smite the enemies of Israel, finish the job that Joshua started. Used him to smite the enemies of Israel. But there came a time when the scripture says that Yahuah had given him rest round about from all his enemies. Even though David was a praiser of Yahuah, he was also a conqueror of Yahuah's enemies, and it was for this reason that Yahuah would not permit him to build the house, because you have been a man of war and have shed much blood. Remember how much Yahuah hates death and cannot be around it, for it's the opposite of everything he is. So, the house of Yahuah, the temple, had to be built by a man of peace, not by a man of war. Yahuah used King David to put his and Israel's enemies under his feet, and this was in fulfillment of the promises Yahuah gave to Abraham, that his seed would possess the gates of his enemies. So we can see this is all started back with Abraham. Yahusha is fulfilling prophecies left, right, and center. First, he brought peace to the nation, and now we're going to build a capital, build a temple, a dwelling place. David desired to build Yahuah a house. This is where it all came from, David's desire. Yeah? One day as King David sat in his house and Yahuah had given him rest from all his enemies, there came into his heart of David a great desire. Look, I dwell in a house of cedars, but the ark of the blood covenant of Yahuah dwells within curtains. He expressed his desire to Nathan to build Yahuah a house, a place more worthy of the ark of Yahuah. Israel had lived in tents in the wilderness journeys. Now they were dwelling in houses and cities. The ark of Yahuah had been in the tabernacle, and under tents for the wilderness journeys also. But now that Israel was in the land of promise, in houses, and enemies had been subdued, why should the ark of Yahuwah still be in a tent and not in a house? The prophet Nathan told David to do all that was in his heart. David's blood covenant. Then, during the night, the word of Yahuwah came to the prophet Nathan, and it was opposite to the word of Nathan the day before. Yahuwah sent Nathan to David and gave him a personal blood covenant. Among the promises given in this blood covenant was the fact that David would not build Yahuwah a house, but his son Solomon would do that. However, because David desired to build Yahuwah a house, Yahuwah promised that he would build David a house. The evident lesson is seen. If Yahuwah's people are concerned for the house of Yahuwah, then Yahuwah will build them a house, a household of belief. If we are concerned more about him and his desire than our own, he will build everything that we need. He will build us a household, a family, and mainly a household of belief. Through this special blood covenant, Yahuwah personally gave David the promise of an appointed place, another land. The promise of victory over enemies. This was all part of his covenant. Remember, covenant is an agreement. You do your part, I'll do my part. You stay true, you guard my commandments and my instructions, I will look after you. Look at the promises that were given to David in his covenant. He was promised an appointed place, another land, victory over his enemies. He was promised kingship involving David's seed, house, and throne would never leave your household. That was the main concern for most kings. If I die out and then my son dies out, I won't live on in the afterlife. That's what they believed in these prehistoric times. But so he was promised, you will live on. Your seed, the scepter, the reign, the kingship will not leave your seed, your house, or your throne. He was promised of sure mercies. He was given the promise of his seed producing the Messiah, the deliverer. He was given the promise of the temple, the house of Yahuwah, and the promise of David's son Solomon to build the house of Yahuwah. What an amazing promise, agreement Yahuwah formed with him. This blood covenant was sealed by blood sacrifices and confirmed with an oath as to being an irrevocable agreement, meaning it will never be cancelled out. And we know it wasn't cancelled out because even though Yahuwah divorced David's seed, the whole nation, he divorced Israel, divorced all of them, David's seed still produced the Messiah. The Messiah still produced the assembly through his blood, and the assembly is still carrying this covenant, new blood covenant. Yeah? So, Yahuwah promises and never breaks them. David's prayer and thanksgiving. With the establishment of remember we're looking at how these desires, how the planning process, how the blueprints were given to David. With the establishment of the blood covenant to David through the prophet Nathan, David's heart is filled with prayer and praise. He went and sat before Yahuwah. His whole prayer and thanksgiving concerns the name of Yahuwah and the two houses, kingdom and priesthood, that would be built. Yahuwah would build David a house because David desired to build Yahuwah a house. David found in his heart to pray this prayer to Yahuwah. The temple revelation and pattern. In 1 Chronicles 28 and 29, we have the account of King David's word to the leadership of the nation as well as to the congregation. David explained the desire he had to build the house for Yahuwah. So he told Solomon and the leaders how he had been given the vision of the temple of Yahuwah by revelation and that he had received the pattern of it all by the set-apart Spirit. Under inspiration of the Spirit, he wrote it down for Solomon and those who would be involved in the building of it. Yahuwah was the architect, the designer of the temple. Nothing was left to man's mind or imagination or creativity. It was all just with Moses' tabernacle, just the same way. It was all of Yahuwah's wisdom. 1 Chronicles 28, we have the following description of the pattern given to David. The pattern of the porch, these are the things that Mikey read as well. Pattern of the porch, the house thereof, the treasuries thereof, the upper chambers thereof, all the inner parlors of the place of the mercy seat, the pattern of all he had by the Spirit, of the courts of the house of Yahuwah, all the chambers around about it, of the treasuries of the house of Yahuwah, the treasuries of the dedicated things, also the courses of the priests, the Levites, and for all the work of the service of the house of Yahuwah, for all the vessels of service in the house of Yahuwah, with the pattern of the chariot of the cherubims. All this, Yahuwah made me understand by writing by his hand upon me, even all the work of this pattern. So the porch, the houses, treasuries, chambers, set apart oracles, the courts, priestly courses, work of the house, vessels, the chariot of the olive cherubim, all were given to David in a vision. And he was inspired to write it down as he had seen the vision. David had a vision of the house of Yahuwah. He received the divine pattern. All that we're going to study in the next few weeks about Solomon's temple, David received all this by divine revelation, the pattern. He was able to write the vision and make it plain. Isn't that our goal? Hear Yahusha and make it plain. David was able to write the vision and make it plain so that Solomon and his workers could build accordingly. Because without a vision, the people perish. Just as the tabernacle of Moses was built according to the divine pattern, not being left to the mind of Moses or his co-builders, David's tent followed the divine pattern in the order of the singers, musicians, and the revolutionary order of praise behavior to Yahuwah. This order was continued on into the temple order and built according to the pattern, revealed to David by the Spirit in writing. And later on also, the temple of Ezekiel is also according to divine pattern. So why was Yahuwah so particular about the pattern in these various structures? Why was he so set on doing everything according, crossing every T and jot and tittle and everything? Why was everything done so specific in these structures? Firstly, the earthly temple was but a shadow on earth of the heavenly temple. David in spirit saw the heavenly temple, even as Moses in spirit saw the heavenly tabernacle. All that is heaven's order is perfect and complete, and is according to the divine blueprint, the pattern of Yahuwah, the architect of the universe. Therefore, the earthly temple, the earthly dwelling place of Yahuwah, must be according to the pattern of the heavenly dwelling place, so that we are understanding divine truths. This was a unique picture here, very interesting, looking at the tabernacle from Yahuwah's point of view, because Yahuwah dwelt on the cherubim, on the mercy seat. So if you were to look the opposite, we normally see the picture of the tabernacle from the other way around, going into the tabernacle. This picture I thought was very interesting, looking at it all from Yahuwah's point of view, going outward towards the camp. Yeah? Anyway, why else? Should we, what was it? Why else was Yahuwah so particular as to the various structures? Why was it so stringent that he kept to the pattern? Because the temple on earth was to be Yahuwah's dwelling place, where he could dwell amongst his people by his Spirit. Here he could reveal his esteem, speak with a voice to his appointed and anointed high priest on the ground of redemption. And of course, this pointed to Yahusha, who is the temple of Yahuwah bodily in the earth. Yahuwah was in Messiah, his temple. His spirit, his esteem, and his voice was heard in and through his temple, Yahusha. He was Yahuwah's sinless and perfect dwelling place everywhere he walked. He was the pattern man. All the patterns were fulfilled in him. He was the pattern man. Therefore, the earthly material temple, which was prophetic of Yahusha, must be according to the pattern. If he's going to fulfill all the patterns of old, all the patterns must be correct. Yeah? Yahusha measured up to the divine standards and pattern of Yahuah as the temple of Yahuah himself. You can see it there. And the same is true of the bride, the body of Yahusha, the assembly, the fellowship, Yahuah's new blood covenant temple, Yahuah's new blood covenant temple, must also be built according to the pattern laid out in the word of Yahuah, the set apart scriptures. That's why we've been talking about covenant. That's why we've been talking about the priestly robes, the garments, now the armor. Put on the complete armor of Elohim. That's why we've been going through these things, because just as the tabernacle, the temple, Yahusha met the standard of divine pattern, we too, the assembly, Yahuah's new blood covenant temple, must be built individually firstly and then corporately as a fellowship, must be built according to the pattern laid out in the word of Yahuah, set apart scripture. Yahuah can only bless in his people that which is holy of himself. Yahuah can only dwell amongst his people in the fullness of esteem as all measure up to the divine measurements, behavior by the Spirit. Understand that he can only bless us. He can only be among us if we are of him, if we are living, behaving his way. Yahuah can only seal with his esteem fire that which is according to the divine pattern, the tabernacle, the temple. Could only receive the divine fire onto the altar, remember? The set apart fire, interdimensional fire, divine fire could only be received, could only shoot through that invisible seam, could only come through when the divine pattern was met. Yahuah can only seal with his esteemed fire that which is according to the divine pattern. Paul, as a wise master builder, received the divine pattern and order for the new blood covenant assembly, the temple of Yahuah, and encouraged all other builders to take heed how you build. Be careful how you build. Not only your own personal temple, how you behave in it, and mature in it and be built up into a lively stone, but also if you're in a fellowship, how you build it. Yeah? How it operates. Take heed how you build. If Yahuah was obsessed, literally obsessed, if Yahuah was obsessed about the material temple being built to his pattern, how much more so concerning his bride? How much more so concerning himself, the head, and his bride, body, together forming the final temple of Yahuah. We're going to see just how obsessively obsessed he is, not only with the tabernacle, but the temple. Every little detail had to be perfect. If he was so obsessed, and that's a good word, obsessed with how temple was built, how much more so concerning himself and his bride? How much more so is he obsessed with how you behave in this temple that he's bought? Undoubtedly, one of the most significant things relative to the temple building is in the fact that Yahuah gave the revelation and pattern of it to a king, not a prophet, although David did play that role too. Yahuah gave the revelation of his pattern of the temple to a king, King David. Then from King David it was given to King Solomon, both of the royal tribe of Judah, who, as we know, was Jacob's son, in whom the scepter will never leave, which David was promised also. In contrast, we see the revelation and pattern of the tabernacle of Yahuah in the wilderness was given to a priest, to Moses of the tribe of Levi, the priestly tribe. Though Moses is called a king and lawgiver, his major office was priest and mediator of the old blood covenant. David, however, is the king of the royal tribe of Judah, yet he touches things pertaining to priestly status. Remember when he put on the ephod and brought in the praise behavior, he touched on things, divine things, pertaining to priestly status and roles, especially in the setting up of his praise tent. In the tabernacle of Moses, Aaron also appears serving as a high priest. However, in the temple of Yahuah, it is Solomon as king who serves. The high priest is not mentioned in all of the building or the dedication and the divine esteem fire that came to the temple on the day, which is certainly an unusual thing. In all of the building, in all the dedication and the fire coming down, Yahuah coming into his temple, no mention of a high priest. Whereas the high priest played all the roles basically in the temple, tabernacle, but in here, no. Solomon officiated everything. Solomon was a king, not a priest. Surely there is something significant in the emphasis on these two separate offices and persons at two separate habitations. However, this is not to say that the office of the high priest was not in function in the temple, because we know it was, for it was. But we have both the offices of king and priest happening at Solomon's temple. For sharper focus, we see that in the old blood covenant, these two offices were basically separated to two people and two different tribes. There was the priestly office of the tribe of Levi and the kingly office of the tribe of Judah. Several men only touched something in measure of these two offices, and each were involved in the building of a habitation for Yahuah. But the fulfillment of these offices is of course seen in Yahushua Messiah, who is our Moses, he's our David, he's our Solomon, all in one person. He fulfilled and transformed the Levitical, Aaronic priesthood and sacrifices. He is of the tribe of Judah, the greatest son of David. He is the builder of the new blood covenant temple, the bride, Yahuwah's greater house. He combines in his humanity, his earthly self body, and in his divinity, because of who he is now, esteemed, resurrected, sitting on the Father's throne. He combines in his humanity and divinity the two offices of king and priest after the order of Melchizedek. So let's wrap this up. To summarize the study about divine habitations, we see that Yahusha has always wanted to be as close as physically possible to his chosen people because he loves them so much. Just look at the planning and effort and patience he's endured to achieve his ultimate goal, close intimacy with his bride, and he's still working with me and you. That's his goal. All these guys received divine revelation. Isaiah, Ezekiel, Moses, David, John in the Revelation, they're all seeing the divine, they're seeing the heavenly throne room, the tabernacle tent, everything. They're seeing what's going on, and they're given the responsibility of mapping it out. Because of course, Yahusha would fulfill it. We are now the fulfillment of it in our vessels. We are the lights. The divine fire is in us, burning us up, offering up the bulls of our lips. We put ourselves on the altar daily. We are that living sacrifice. If we fail, what does anyone around us see? Let's not say, what does the world see? Because that's just grand and religion. No. What does your family see? What is your business? What is your community? What does the people around you see if you're not exhibiting the divine fire, if you're not living to the divine pattern? And what's the pattern of covenant? Look at the covenant David was given. Mighty, amazing covenant. And the promises rung true all through. Yahusha was the fulfillment of those promises too. Even the promises given way back to Abraham. Yahusha is the fulfillment of all promises and revelations and prophecies. So This was just a bit of an overview of where we're going with this Temple of Solomon study, and we're going to get into the nuts and bolts, literally, in weeks to come. So, love you guys. Stay strong and just wear your armor the minute you wake up in the morning. Armor on. 3 rules. Amazing. Love yous.